All right, well, things are different around here. Not really. I just want to ask, what label did Spiral Scratch come out on?
It's on a label called New Hormones Records, which their friend Richard Boone set up. And Pete Shelley's dad lent Pete Shelley £400 to record the record and release it. So technically it's DIY record, self-release. Yeah.
That's awesome. I used to have that. And then Danny was holding it up one day and he was like, "This record is so cool," and he snapped it in half. You asshole. Danny was the Avengers drummer.
We're devoted.
Yeah. I'm going to read a little bit from a PM Press book here, some free advertising for them. It's called Up the Dial, Conversations with Punk Icons. And I was just paging through it, and I came on a Tony Kinman interview, and Tony was in the Dills, one of my favorite bands. We played with him a lot. And he, I'm not going to read the part where he says, Jello is a suck ass. I'm moving on past that, to where he says he was very clever. This has a lot to do, well, I'm going to use a vague amorphous term loaded with potentially pompous sounding shit, but the artistic community, and you can look at the punk rock community as an artistic community, to find comfort in conformity among your peers, among your old neighborhood, is always a really strong human tendency. For true rebels and independent thinkers, that's not something that's important to them. They're always looking for something else out of life, out of art or anything, any human endeavor. Something more than comfort, more than, okay, here's my four walls. Everything is groovy inside these walls, so I never want to change. He's an example of somebody, and Tim Yohannan of Maximum Rock and Roll was an example of this too, because he was part of the whole thing, what happened in San Francisco. The guys needed to have punk rock to be something that had a finite beginning, a finite end. You will go this far and no further. Here's a list of what is punk rock. Here's a list of what isn't. Please read the list. You are responsible, and ignorance is no excuse. We will actually decide who among us are and are not punk rock. That's what they were waiting for, and by the time 1980 and 81 rolled around, because by 1979 the whole thing was coming on strong, but by the time 1980 and 81 came around, it was there. The Johannans and Biafras of the world had it. And he goes on to say that he's talking about the first wave of punk rock where no band sounded alike, they all sounded different, and how that ended with hardcore. And this has kind of been one of my themes. This has been one of my themes over the years as well, is that there came this time when people felt they needed to define exactly what was punk and exactly what wasn't punk. And when punk started in the Bay Area in around 77, it was, there was amazing diversity of sound and of attitude and of bands. And that's kind of what I loved about it. And I just was thinking back today about what we thought we were doing. And were we aware, or how aware were we? Because we weren't necessarily trying to define everything, although there was this weird shift of like, what is punk and what is new wave? And what's the difference between punk and new wave? And that kind of all went away when hardcore came along. But that was kind of a weird dichotomy there. But I will say one thing, and I'll kind of wrap it up here, because I think I'm rambling. But we did really think that we were changing culture. We did think that we were ending something, that we were, crushing an old version of youth culture or rock and roll. And from the dust of that, with the spit and dust of that, we were putting together a new shape and a new thing that we call punk. And we knew it was important and it was going to change stuff. We didn't know how, we didn't want to define it, but we knew that we had blanked stuff out and we were starting fresh, and anybody could do it, and anyone's friends who were in the audience could start a band tomorrow, and that was going to be perfect and great. And that's what I guess that's my definition of punk, is that freedom.
I'd like to zoom out a little bit and take a broader view of punk rock, but first I want to read a quote from a neurologist, Stephen Novella. "Our memories are not an accurate recording of the past. They are constructed from imperfect perception filtered through our beliefs and biases, and then over time they morph and merge. Our memories serve more to support our beliefs rather than inform them." So that's a caveat for anything I say, and as probably by far the oldest person on the panel here, I probably need that. And as a test of this, I want to ask a question to Jello, which if you would be so gracious could answer on his portion of this panel. I have a memory, my memory of this is probably 1978 or 1979, and I remember Jello getting on our bus. That's about all I remember, but I think we were going on tour, and I'm not sure now. He'll have a different story, which will just show you that these memories that we have are not written in stone. This is very fluid. So anyway, I want to zoom out a little bit about punk rock. Punk rock didn't come from nowhere. Before that, there was the big hard rock, progressive rock explosion in 1970, which was extremely important in Britain, in France, in Germany, in Italy. And it had, in my opinion, a lifespan of about 3 years. And in that 3 years, it started off with just such a wonderful explosion of art and of ideas. And it was very, very similar to punk rock that came in 1976 in some ways, that it was untethered. By 1973, those bands were searching to have commercial success, and probably a lot of them individually were searching to meet a woman, because most of them never seen them. And so they started playing music that was more palatable. They discovered the minor 7 chord, or they became more of a funk, something that people can dance to. It was over, right? 73, the progressive rock explosion was over. But that was my background. I started my first band in 1970, we were progressive rock. And I moved down to London in, I did a reconnaissance in 1976. I was playing in a band that was similar to Soft Machine with saxophone. And I was walking through Hyde Park and I saw 2 people sitting on a bench. This was sometime in 76, and one had bright green hair and one had bright red hair, a couple. And there was no one else there, just green grass and these 2 fluorescent points of colour. And I guess that was symbolic for me of something changing. For me, the pub rock scene had already led up to this point, and there was already a backlash against these floundering progressive rock bands that were no more interesting or exciting. So the pub rock scene set the stage, literally, for punk rock. The difference is, in my opinion, and I don't know anybody else shares this opinion, but for me, punk rock was a skeptical movement. Overnight, we didn't believe. And that's what happened to me in 1976. All of a sudden, I didn't believe. I didn't believe that Soft Machine 6 was a good album. I still believe that Soft Machine 3 was, and Soft Machine 4. We didn't believe that you had to spend or have some person to finance you to have the equipment to play like Yes did, or Genesis, or fill in the blanks. So overnight we didn't believe, and I've just jotted down some of the things that we no longer believed. We didn't believe in government. Not that there shouldn't be a government, but the government was necessarily giving you the right answers and looking after your best interests. We didn't believe in music as it was at that time, that there could be nothing better. We didn't believe in art, that because it could only be art if it was in the Tate Gallery. It could be art that was more immediate. And of course there was precursors to that with Andy Warhol. It didn't come out of nowhere, but this is where everything got a focus point in 1976. So religion. We all had an anti-religion song in 1976. Health. We didn't believe in all the hippie ideas about what we were being pushed from the alternative culture at the time. And fashion. You can make your own. In 1976 and 1977, we made our own clothes. We went to Seditionaries, which was later, well, Sex, it was called Sex back then it was Seditionaries, and then Boy on King's Road. But because we were in a band, we would get a heavy discount, but most of the clothes we made ourselves. So this is what we were sceptical about. So in my opinion, it was a sceptical movement, and each band maybe didn't focus on the entirety of sceptical topics, but each band focused on some of them. So punk was a huge gift to me. I got to travel all around the world, from New Zealand, Australia, Japan, South America, pretty much everywhere that there was a circuit for rock music. We were the first band to play behind the Iron Curtain. We did commercial things like Top of the Pops 7 times, did big tours, accumulating in the BBC, doing an open vote where we were voted the best punk band in the world. So these are, not that that means anything, but it gave me a life that I can't imagine I could have had without it. It was a great vehicle. Now, these days, for the last 4 years, I've been playing progressive rock. I've gone back to what my first love was, and I'd just like to, for John's sake, I'd just like to show you the flared trousers. We can talk about that afterwards. In London, particularly in 1977, when we got established with UK Subs, I used to put a suit and tie on. I would go into clubs and say I'm a music promoter. We promote pop music. And then when we got there, it was a punk band, but by that time we'd got a pretty big following by 77, and we had 200 people would show up. And we would get a residency there until it got too rowdy, and we built our own scenes. We had bands like Crass would always open for us, and Menace, and it was a wonderful time of life. And I'll end by saying that I've not abandoned my love for punk at that time. I get a lot of fight back against the fact that I do progressive rock now. But people should realise that to see a Hawkwind show in 1970, or Magma, or one of these great bands, was as exciting as it was to be involved in the early punk rock scene. By the time we were very well established, I must confess it was more like a job for me. I would like to have moved on and done something a little bit more musically interesting, but by that time the pie was baked, and that's all I've got to say.